couple of summers ago, they had the mic check guy, their in-house dude at the Virgin Hotel who ran sound for us for 2 days, had his own patter, and he would go, and me and my friends all still do this. He would go, "Oh!" It just sounded like you're being invaded by mafia guys. Like he was like, "Oh!" And they would say things like, what? And so sometimes we say that to each other, which is really weird in the supermarket, but appropriate on stage. So
that's great. Well, everything's looking good and we're about ready to start. So I'm just going to start off.
Okay, do it.
Welcome back to Friends in Austin. Today I have Kevin Newsum on the podcast, who was on I believe the third episode. It's called Kevin Newsum, Steamm Espresso. It was before we were doing video. So I thought it would be, also I knew that there's some updates with Steamm. So I thought it'd be fun to have you back on the podcast now that we have a studio.
Well, we tried to break the show with the third episode, but we did not succeed in breaking the show. So we're back to try again. No, for real, thanks for having me. It was great. I had a blast last time. It's fun to sit here. And, for your listeners / viewers have probably figured this out, but your studio has changed. Like I was in here in the early days and it looks great. It really looks great. Well, it was super intentional.
Yeah, when you were here, there was 2 rooms, and we're just in the one little room. And I had a little glass table that was a coffee table that I've since gotten rid of. There was just a blanket thrown over it, and then some blankets and stuff hung up on the wall,
which worked fine, totally not broken. Yeah. But yeah, this is very cool. So if you've not been by for Justin's studio tour, I highly recommend it.
So, how's Steamm going?
It's going all right. So so I guess probably the last news that we had was, let's talk about the pandemic because that's what happens probably in every one of your episodes. But
and then also tell people what it is in case they haven't. Most people probably haven't seen the first 5 episodes, I'd say.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Steamm is ready to drink bottled espresso, which we brew and bottle here in Austin. We steep basically there's little bottles of espresso shots steeped in raw cacao, so they're kind of like little mochas, high octane mochas. And so we started producing those mid-summer 2018, and there's been kind of an evolution of the business. We talked about that a lot. I won't recap all of that for this show, but suffice it to say that we rolled into 2020 and we had it all figured out. Here's exactly what we're going to do. And then 2020 said, hey, guess what? We have other ideas. And so we fortunately, we'd started by doing a bunch of direct-to-consumer stuff, and we still do some of that where we ship it directly to your house. But we also have opened up the retail channel a little bit. And so probably what you're referring to is the most recent announcement that we had, which has a little bit of a longer tail on it. I'll give you the very short version of that story, which is we had some conversations with Central Market, which is kind of so the largest grocery store in Texas for anybody who's not in this state is H-E-B. And it's kind
of like a Whole Foods style of H-E-B, right?
Yeah. So yeah, Central Market operates separately, although it's under their larger umbrella, and they're kind of they're the upscale sort of curated version of what H-E-B does. And so anyway, they're lovely stores. No 2 of them are exactly the same. And they do a really nice job of, kind of making shopping around in there feel like a sort of a special experience. And so anyway, we just started talking to those guys. And of course, then the pandemic hit, and we had gotten to a place where they do a yearly event that they call something along the lines of Taste of Texas. Like I've heard 3 or 4 different names for it, but basically it's a thing for emerging brands where they bring emerging brands in for a couple of weeks, introduce their audience to them. And, and worst case scenario is they have you in for a couple of weeks, and if it doesn't make forever, you still got some nice exposure in a really cool store. And so we were really excited just to be selected. And then if it goes better, then it can go better and you can get on the shelves permanently. So anyway,
how did you get selected anyway?
Well, that's a longer story, but basically I got to know, so couple of things. One was, we won Best CPG brand in Austin from the Austin Young Chamber in January. I think we probably talked about that last time.
Yeah, that was about a month after that I believe we talked. Maybe 2 months after that.
I know. Well, and the whole world has changed anyway. It literally feels like a billion years ago. But,
I know.
Yeah, as illustrated by your studio changes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we'd won that, and so there was a little bit of a publicity long tail that came off of that, where it's like people recognize the brand who were sort of in the business of paying attention to what CPG brands do in the Austin area, which as a place to grow a retail brand, this is a pretty collaborative city, and there are a lot of really smart, creative people who do some cool things here. So anyway, so there's a little bit of a scene. It's kind of like the way that I put it, and the way that I probably put it in the last show that I was on here. It's a little like what being in tech was like 15 years ago. Like really smart people, a bunch of great ideas. Not everything's going to work, but there are people just trying crazy stuff all the time that is like sort of genre defying. So in that sense, it was cool. But the end of that story is their Taste of Texas event that happens at Central Market typically happens in, it's like April or May. And of course, April or May, we're basically just washed out to sea everywhere thanks to COVID. And so they were like, we're going to put this off. And I just assumed that it was canceled. And then we got word from them in late August that they're like, hey, in September, we're going to do this and we want you guys to come in. So we've been on the shelves there in all of their stores across the state. We're still on their shelves, as I haven't been in there today, but like we still should be on there for as long as they have them. And then we're going to talk again in the beginning of the new year. So we are, first of all, I would say if you're somewhere where there's a Central Market, please go buy some Steamm. And then the second thing, and I hope you like it, send me a note if you do or don't. And then the second thing is that we're fingers crossed, and obviously it's up to the Central Market people, but we're going to, they like us so far, I think, and we're optimistic that we can get in there for good starting in January.
Oh, nice. So yeah. I was going to ask you, like, I mean, I'm sure it's basically just like they look at how many sold and then they make a decision. Is there a predetermined number that they're looking for?
It's math. So it's like, so basically the way that's been explained to me, and this totally makes sense, right? It's like you have X amount of space on the shelves given in your store, and based upon the size of our stuff, like there is an equation for basically how much that space is worth. And then over time, basically the difference between what we sold them our product at wholesale and what they're able to retail it for, they figure how much they can make overall based upon the whole haul. Mm-hmm. And they ordered, X number of cases. And so they have an idea of the math up front. Then it becomes,
what's X number of cases? You don't have to tell me.
Well, enough that it was great. It was like
substantial boost.
It was a high five number.
Mm-hmm. So, a high five number. Yeah. Nice. I love that.
Yeah. So it was like, and it's not like nobody's going shopping for hot tubs, but we were genuinely pleased. And it was a number that showed that they were serious about putting us on the shelves and giving us a chance to put it out there. So that was cool.
That's funny because last time you said no one's high-fiving to the bank.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I didn't maybe that's my crutch phrase. But yeah. So the gist is it's like but it is. It's math, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like our cases. This is just sorry for nobody who cares to get in the weeds about this, but it's like they're 3 bottles wide. So each bottle is a 2-ounce bottle that has 2 shots in it. They're 3 bottles wide and 4 bottles deep. So the case size is 12 bottles. And so basically they look at the math of like how much space you're taking up and how much they expect to make based on what your stuff, the difference between retail, MSRP and wholesale. And then they look at velocity, like how quickly does it move?
Yeah, so if you have a bigger product, you need to make better margin, right? Like, because you're taking up more space. They could fill you that space with 2 smaller products that are moving faster,
For sure. Well, and one of the things that we found is that they bought 2 SKUs. So we have 2 different types that we make. We have a original brand that we make with both are steeped in cacao. One we make with a little bit of pure cane sugar, and we make another one that for people who don't do sugar with erythritol.
I want to talk about SKUs for a second.
Yeah.
Because I had someone else on the podcast who was saying it's very hard to get those and they cost a lot of money. So like they bought them, you didn't have to buy them?
No, I bought them.
Okay, you bought them? Is this guy right about that or?
Depends.
It was a while ago that he's talking about this.
It depends, and I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. Because there is, and this is one of the things that they don't, running your own brand is both liberating and super humbling, and sometimes like within hours of each other. So one of the things that you run into is like, so you can buy SKUs like UPCs, you can buy them.
Universal product codes, right?
Right. Yeah. Barcodes. You can literally buy them on the internet in 5 seconds. It's not hard. It's frankly not that expensive.
Okay.
But the problem is that there are a bunch of big box stores who only like UPCs that come from a very specific clearinghouse, and they don't tell you that everywhere when you start buying them. So what ends up happening is like, and Central Market doesn't care. They're fine. Knock wood. But but there is, in all likelihood, we are probably going to have to change a couple of our UPCs and that's our SKUs, and that's okay.
Okay.
But in terms of buying them, yeah, if you buy them through certain channels, they can be expensive, and you can buy them through other places. It just really sort of depends on your strategy. If you're going to do business with Kroger, then you probably have to buy the special ones.
Okay, so there's some people are particular about where your SKU comes from.
Right. Or they have decided that within their system they're cool with a certain type of SKU, but not otherwise.
Is that for tech reasons, do you think, or is it something else?
It could be, like, I frankly haven't asked, to tell you the truth.
No. And it's a weird thing to ask. I'm just curious.
Well, and it's like as a brand, and certainly as a boutique brand, it's like you have to be a little surgical about the questions that you ask and why. So it's like, not to say that I can't ask them like, what's up with your weird UPC policy? But
they'll be like, next.
Well, and I don't know that that's the case. Like, so the funny thing was, and this is I didn't plan on talking about any of this, so hopefully it won't bite me. But the interesting thing is, so you work with, so in this case, like the way that this deal came together, the store, I had a relationship with the store. I didn't have a relationship with the distributor. So the store put me in touch with a distributor and said, work with this guy. And so the distributor was like, hey, happy to work with you. And we settled on the numbers, and all that was cool. And they bought the the distributor literally bought the product from us, not the store.
Okay.
They probably marked it up a little bit and moved it over. So all that's fine. But the distributor has their own motivation, and part of their motivation is that, like, the volume that they're doing with the end store, like where the shelves are, is a lot bigger. It's not any more important to them than that business is to a little brand that's trying to get bigger. But just in terms of the scale that they're working on, it's different. So you get some information from the distributor that maybe, this, again, I just apologize to anybody who doesn't want to get in the weeds about grocery stores, but it's like, I think about this stuff a lot, and it is fascinating. And if you ever, I'll put this to your audience. So if you ever go into a store, if there's something that you buy a lot where you recognize that they put it on sale sometimes and the price moves up and down, watch the strategy, because it's really fascinating the way that these work. And that's part of the reason why part of the reason that grocery stores grow is because we all have to eat and drink to live. But the other part is that they're really sophisticated with data. The good ones are, and they're really smart about the way that they put products in front of people to try and move them. I mean, one of the things that I noticed is that you're drinking a hard seltzer, which is a very busy category these days.
Yeah.
And so this is, again, something else I didn't plan on talking about, but there was a guy, John Madden, told a story about, the football coach told a story about going to a seminar, I guess, presumably like in the 60s, that Vince Lombardi, the former late coach of the Packers, had put on, and he talked about one play for 8 hours with just a room full of coaches, and it was just one play. And so he just dissected it, and we could do 8 hours on hard seltzer. Like, that is, the interesting thing is, like, as tastes continue to evolve and people are drawn in by, we're all sitting around the house, people are counting calories. So stuff like that becomes pretty important. So it kind of makes sense. But when you see the way that buyer behavior is reflected on the floor, and just the monkeying around with the price, and then the way that where things get put and why, it's pretty interesting.
Like the old putting the milk in the back of the store. Is that true, do you think? I mean, just to make you walk all the way back
Well,
there to get
you know,
milk?
I told you that that in England they put the beer next to the diapers. Like, and I was like, that sounds crazy unless you ever like had a little kid around, in which case you're like, no, that's super appropriate. So,
That is interesting.
Anyway, yeah. So that is the much longer than anticipated version of that of what's been going on with Steamm, and we have some conversations going with other outlets, and so we're moving forward and hopeful and starting to see some interest in some places that we've been trying to get into. So,
well, congrats. That's very exciting that you got into those stores. I'm happy for you.
Yeah. Now we just got to stay there.
Yeah. I just got to stay there. So when they did that rollout, they rolled out to every central market in Texas?
Yeah.
Geez, that's a huge rollout. So like they don't even play around. They just boom, like all of them.
Well, and to be fair, we're not talking. So, I don't know how many. I'm not sure what the store count is of HEB. It's like, I don't know, probably 400 and something, maybe a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But Central Market's just like 10 stores. So it's like, It's not impossible.
Yeah.
But they're spread out, and it was, and our brand isn't intended, at least our original thought was we wanted it to play upscale. And so in that sense, like it feels like a natural place where it would make sense.
Seems like it makes sense to me as well.
Yeah.
So did you have any trouble fulfilling those orders? I mean, was that a big process and getting all those ready to go?
Well, I mean, more volume is a certain amount of pain, but it's like that's part of what scaling is, right? So you want there to be more. So anyway, I guess I would say, we have filled bigger orders than the one that we had to fill for Central Market, but the one that we had to fill for Central Market was significant, and it was really exciting to try it to get it in there and see how it did, and try and do some things to, share the word and evangelize a little bit about what we were up to.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what else has been going on?
So as if that had not been busy enough, I took on a consulting engagement that has nothing to do with consumer product goods.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When did you start this?
Probably 3 or 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I have been doing a little bit of evangelical work, so to speak, spreading the word about a virtual events platform that was founded in Bangalore, India, and behaves nothing like Zoom. Like basically, it's like it got spun up outside of the thought bubble and outside of the whatever. When Zoom got Kleenexed in the United States, like whatever it was, late February, early March, it's like this was happening on other parts of the world completely separately. So instead of like what I have found is that there are a lot of these, and there are a lot of virtual event platforms out there, and some pretty good ones. But
and where's this one out of?
They were founded in India.
Okay, so this is like a startup out of India that is doing virtual events, which is, of course, a competitor to Zoom.
And a bunch of, yeah. So they just raised 12 million Series A about a month ago. It is, as you might imagine, as long as there's sort of no endpoint in sight for COVID, it looks to be a pretty lucrative space. There's another player in the space that just raised, I don't know, maybe it's like a $380 million Series B or something. So that was not Zoom. So
even post-COVID, I mean, I would expect remote work to continue to rise faster than it previously was, which I'm pretty sure was still rising fairly quickly even before COVID.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's probably true, and I think that now that there are a bunch of people who've had a taste of working at home, like some people are going to be really eager to try and go back to the office whenever the endpoint comes.
I feel like some people are going to be super depressed when their employer makes them go back to the office.
I think that's probably true.
Problem.
I think that's probably true. But I also think that like the hybrid world is probably going to see an uptick too. So it's like if you're a big company, or if you're a company at any size and you can make your people go back to the office after it's safe to do so, okay, that is what it is. And that'll probably happen some places. But I do think that tastes are changing, and it's like, what I'll be really fascinated to see is like, okay, so now you hear the tiers of, like in Central Texas, like downtown Austin property owners and certainly those who have owned companies who are, who are renting from those guys. But it's just hard. Like, rents are expensive, and especially in a city like ours where it's continues to grow and rise and expand. That didn't necessarily look to change, and so what will be really interesting, we'll just see what bubbles up that happens downtown. I don't know if it's going to be the death of retail. I don't know if it's going to mean a shift in the sands regarding the way that offices work. But I really would be unsurprised if, at the very least, we don't start to see, if not more virtual office roles, but certainly like kind of a hybrid approach, like just
just also to make people happier. I mean, it's tough to ask somebody to commute 45 minutes each way 5 times a week. It's asking quite a bit.
It is. Yeah. Well, just in terms of like, if you have a job that requires your full attention from the time that you wake up until the time that you stop doing it, it's like if you in a city like this one where it's like we really don't do mass transit well yet.
No.
So it's like there's no.
You have to have a car, but
right,
you're still sitting in traffic.
Well, right. Well, and then so years ago, before I ever went to work for Yelp, I almost took a job at Yahoo, which sounds like it was like a billion years ago. But one of the things that I remember about the Bay Area at that time was that they had, these big tech companies would have buses with Wi-Fi that would come out and pick everybody up. So you'd drive to a place where you'd park, and then you'd take the 45 or hour-long commute in on this company bus, and you could work on the bus while you were on your way to work at the office, which sounds...
It's an improvement.
It is an improvement. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an improvement over... You can't type and drive yourself. So, there are just little things like that I think they are going to require some creativity on the back end, just in terms of like what the expectations of the workforce are. And who knows, maybe I'll be totally wrong and everybody will be like, please let me go back to the office. I can't wait to get to the water cooler. But I don't think that that's going to happen exactly that way. Yeah,
no way. I mean, most people I talk to would rather either be permanently remote, or the other, I would say maybe 30% were like, I'd love to come in twice a week,
Yeah.
Which makes sense because collaboration needs to happen. You can cram all that in to those 2 days, and then if you're just working on your computer, just work on your computer at home.
Yeah, for sure.
Save yourself that commute time and also relieve some of the traffic and the environmental impact and everything else.
Yeah, that's not nothing.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the point I guess I was halfway making was that a few months ago I started doing this consulting work for this Indian virtual events company. It's called AirMeet.
AirMeet?
AirMeet.
Yeah, gotcha. It makes sense. Yeah.
The interesting thing is, it's like, and I've had a lot of time to think about like what happens in an echo chamber, and how when Zoom got Kleenexed in, let's call it late February, early March.
And it's a funny expression I never heard before, but basically you're saying Kleenex is like a tissue, but the brand is so popular that people call it Kleenex, right?
Right. People just, like, to my face, will continue to use the word Zoom as if that means virtual event meeting. And it's like, I know what they're talking about, and that's really the only thing, I guess, that matters. But
I never thought Zoom was that great.
I think it does certain things very well, but just in general, one of the big challenges with virtual events platform is that they leave out like sort of an entire third of the experience of, in my opinion, of like what it's like to connect offline in the real world. So I'll tell this story, and I'll try and tell it in a way that doesn't sound super salesy. So the gist of the reason that AirMeet exists is because there are two co-founders, and one of them, the company's only like, I don't know, like a year and a half old. Like they're still pretty new. And one of the co-founders was supposed to travel to a conference in San Francisco, and his wife had a baby, and so he couldn't go, but he still decided he was going to attend this conference anyway. And so he did. And basically what he found was that the keynotes were fine. Like, it's like watching TV. You can see anybody do a keynote pretty much on any platform. It's pretty much the same, sort of a talking head situation. But what he found was lacking where all of the sort of like-minded people that you bump into when you go to these things. So it's like,
so he couldn't attend in person, but he's attended online.
Online. Yeah. And so, yeah, he just found that whole, like, all the networking stuff, like the shaking hands with somebody who's maybe not ever going to be on stage, but it has a similar experience, or you can help each other, or like all the things that we just sort of take for granted.
Pretty much most of the value of a conference, in my opinion, because you can always watch those videos later.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So basically, instead of, I mentioned like the idea of the echo chamber, like, so instead of building something that looked and functioned like an American product, they basically built something that works like going to an event offline. So it's like you walk into this sort of, you enter this, and I don't want this to sound like Second Life because it's not at all, but it's like you enter like sort of what looks like a virtual ballroom, and it's a bunch of tables and the tables have chairs, and at one end there's a stage and could be a podium or a panel or whatever. But anyway, if you're attending something on the AirMeet platform, it's like you go in and you sit down. So you and I sit down at the same table, up pops a dialogue box, and you and I can have a video chat wherever we are at the table level that's private, just like, we're going to exchange business cards somewhere. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So that's just one little wrinkle of how it's gone. But
are they pulling that off well? Is their software pretty good?
I think so. So everything lives on the cloud. So it's like, there's nothing to download. Like, anyway, again, I really am, I'm trying to be conscious of like not being too smarmy about it. But the gist is that, it's pretty easy to deploy. They're iterating it like crazy, and it's a very different experience. If you're only used to Zoom, WebEx, choose your adventure on any of those. There are things that those platforms do very, very well, and their success is certainly well deserved. But this will be different, and it's designed to remind us like what's cool about all of the things that we don't plan on happening at some of these events that can happen.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting idea. So did they raise money in India, or did they raise money here? So
they raised money, primarily in India, as I understand. So they did a friends and family round, and then they just, like I say, a month ago announced Series A. And typically the way that all that stuff usually works, and it's like they tell me things when I need to know them and not before, but typically the way that stuff works is that once you have raised your Series A, you're working on Series B. And it's certainly because another platform just announced a sizable round. Like, there's money out there. There's VC with dry powder. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that VCs need somewhere to put their money, because I'm sure that they've toned down on certain kinds of startups and everything else.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just some of this stuff, like, one of the things that and it's interesting because we end up talking a lot with higher ed, for example. So it's like, July and August, I mean, you couldn't talk often enough to universities who were trying to just make sure they had everything lined up.
They should have been doing this shit years ago, and now it's an emergency.
Right. Well, I mean, maybe, at the very least, like, habits change under in this case, like, just by virtue of the fact that it had to change. But but certainly I think it's fair to say, like, some have been more poised to make that adjustment than others. And then you also just notice like some interesting wrinkles. Like, I do think that one of the things that has happened more recently is people are becoming more sophisticated consumers of that type of experience. And so their expectations are growing. So it's like, there are some cracks in some of these other platforms, and none of them are perfect. Like, basically, I do tell everybody, it's like, listen, anytime you're working with software, whether it lives on the cloud or on your computer, and you can corroborate or deny this because you know what you're talking about, but I was like, it's like a content management system. They're all like owning used cars. It's like they have their own weird little quirks, and it's like, once you get the rhythm of what it is, then you're great. And I think, in a sense, that has so far been the moat of some of these virtual event platforms that have already established themselves as having done really well. Is that, like, okay, we've been able to teach it to people who don't like to learn technology. And it's like, now that they've learned it, my dad still has an AOL account. So it's like, do not underestimate the fact that like people will just show me how to do it once. And if it doesn't break, then that helps. So there's an educational component. And I think that's part of the reason why, the guys over at AirMeet were looking for some help to just kind of spread the word a little bit. So
how did you find out about them anyway?
Mutual contacts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't necessarily looking for, I've got plenty to do, but I, had talked to somebody who was a friend of a friend who had just been through a demo, and they were like, this is kind of cool. And the more that I got to thinking about it, of course, at the time we were all just stuck at home, and so it just occurred to me that I was like, this might be the time to try and do something like this, or at the very least to explore it in a way that is not just helpful because they need some help and they're willing to pay somebody to help them do it, but also because like we were talking about 10 minutes ago, like we may be in the middle of a fundamental shift in the way that we work. And if that's the case, there are all kinds of scenarios under which like it's going to make it. And honestly, like what could very well happen is like, again, maybe some of us end up going back to work and others of us are going to be doing things virtually, but it's like, I'll be interested to see not a year from now, but 2 years from now, like how much of this pervades, and time will tell.
Yeah. It is tough to tell.
And
so
with that, I'm going to have a sip of this sparkling water.
Okay. And then I want to ask you something else. You mentioned football earlier.
Yeah.
What is your opinion about the NFL operating without a bubble?
Well, here's what's fascinating to me about. There are a lot of things. We could do another hour on the NFL, for crying out loud. But what's fascinating about the NFL are a few things. Like, in particular, they sell the helmet, not the personality. So it's like you don't have situations where you get a bunch of cheap commentary from players that undermine what's coming out of the home office. So even if the home office is like, we don't know what we're doing, we're just going to try and figure it out. Generally speaking, like there's a way that what happens at the player and coach level in the league gets synthesized. Like, I just feel like the audience is basically like, just show us the games. Like, that's really what we care about. So I do think that generally speaking, it's hard. It is. I think it's hard no matter how you police state, like to have any kind of crowd at any of these games is a challenge. And just because I'm a nerd for stuff like this, it's like I have been really fascinated to watch how the different leagues do audiences. Like that stuff's crazy.
So the NFL is doing audiences. I don't.
They are.
Okay, they are. Like they're just a smaller audience.
They do pods. So it's like it at least this is the way that it looks. So it's like if you have a 75,000 person stadium, they may have a crowd of like 15 or 20, and it looks like the policy may be stadium by stadium, but it seems like it's generally kind of the same. So if you look at them on TV, it's like there may be little clusters of friends who have to prove that they're within the same sort of circle.
They're their group, yeah.
Right. That can sit together. Or it's a situation where you just scan the stands and it's like no one can be within like 5 or 6 seats of whoever else is sitting on that row. So there really is not, there's not a perfect way to do it. And I get the people who like have a Sports Jones and they just miss the ritual of like sitting around and watching football on a Saturday, or a Sunday or whatever. And so either way, it is admittedly an imperfect situation. The games seem pretty much the same, except that every now and then you're like, oh, this whole team just got sick. And so now we've got 4 games on a Tuesday. Like that stuff is crazy too. So I do think that like, yeah, maybe in a couple of years, it's like, we'll also look back at this and go like, that was hilarious because it was super weird. But now it just seems like mostly off-putting until the games start, and then they just look like games.
Yeah.
So it's like, as long as you're not trying to be there in person, I find that generally speaking, it still sort of scratches the sports fan itch to like be able to just to take them in. If what you're really asking is it irresponsible? The answer is probably.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, the reason I asked is because last podcast we argued about that for like 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm not super like invested in either side of the argument.
Yeah. No, I mean, the answer is probably.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, really, like if with any amount of clinical seriousness, the answer is everybody stay home until further notice.
Yeah, but if you did that, like there would be no jobs at all. Like it'd just be over.
It would be very hard.
Yeah.
And so, I don't presume, I may strike you. It may surprise you to know that I am not Dr. Fauci, but I do think in general, like less contact is better. Try to stay in your circle as you can. Yeah. And then, this is one area where it's like, and I may have even mentioned this last time, but it's like, we are kind of lucky in that Austin hasn't figured out mass transit yet, and we live here instead of someplace like New York or DC or San Francisco where it's or LA, where it's like, and LA is a driving town, so maybe that's a bad example, but like Chicago, like where they are, just packed in. I can't imagine living in an apartment the size of this studio. Like
I've lived in an apartment the size of this studio in Chicago.
Yeah, right.
Are your kids going back to school, physical school?
They are.
How do you feel about that?
I'd rather them go back to imaginary school. Just kidding. So I know that's like a trigger question too, but it's like, it's fine. Like, and actually, so here's the thing. If you're a parent and you have children in the Austin Independent School District, it's really scary and terrible, and please don't send them back, because right now there's nobody back except for I'm kidding. So basically the deal is that so I have a kindergartner and a fourth grader, and my fourth grader so basically the way that AISD phased everybody in was that they let the pre-K kids and the kindergarten kids go back first. So mostly because developmentally at that age, it's like it's like I keep sort of having half deja vu, and I don't know whether I've told you these stories or whether they've just come out, but whatever. So what happens with, so both of my kids went to pre-K at the elementary school here in Austin that they go to. One of them, well, actually this happened with both of them. It's like basically 4 and 5-year-olds, contingent upon how old, like what part of the year they were born in, as to whether they're eligible to start pre-K or not. They all start school pretty much as babies. Like they're little kids with pretty, the hardest thing is like getting your head around going to school versus being at home with your parents all the time, whatever. And the first, from September through December break is pretty much, give or take, kind of a shit show. They struggle, and some of them take to it better than others, but it is hard. And then they go away for Christmas break, and they come back, and all of them have evolved. And it's like, I don't know if it is just because they're of the age that it's like you get used to the routine. It's really hard. You go home, and it like you can synthesize at that age the difference between the time when you were a little kid and just there with your mom or your dad or your family all the time, and having been to school and knowing what that experience is like. But they all come back more sophisticated, more complex, more stable. And it's like I'm just amazed by it. Like, and it's one of those deals where it's like you kind of, there's some truth to the idea that little girls pick things up faster than little boys do. But with both of my kids, I have a girl and a boy, but with both of them, it's like they went to the first half of school and just, tried to swim as best they could, so to speak. And then after Christmas break, they came back and really flourished. And the hard thing for my little guy, who is now in kindergarten, was that when all of the rest of the school year got washed away, he didn't really have any place or the means to process that. So, and it's like when you do video calls with your classmates, it's like that he recognizes that is not the same thing. So it's like we have a photo from one of his Zoom classes. We have
and how old is he?
He's 5. He's almost 6.
He's 5 and he's doing Zoom classes.
Yeah, they did pre-K Zoom classes last year, and they've done some of them this year, but now they're back. So anyway, so the gist is that and he's also, and my daughter is again, sorry about this for everybody else, but it's like she could be followed around by a spotlight all day and do great. He's very shy, and so we have a screenshot of all of the kids in his class, and that he had made me black out turn off his video and put his name down as not Miles. and so
very inconspicuous.
Yeah. I was like,
Miles.
I was like, you would be the worst spy in the world. So it's been fun. So ask what you're going to ask.
You think it's more important that the younger kids go back?
AISD thinks that if there was going to be an order in the way that they go back, that the young kids should go back first, because developmentally it's harder for them. You know, if my 4th grader didn't go back at all this year, she'd be fine. Like, she could manage. But for the little ones who are really trying to figure out themselves as people and see themselves within the context of that learning environment, there is some stuff that's pretty important. Now, for anybody who says it's dangerous and this is a pandemic time and unprecedented and no way, Jose, I get it. Like, I am unoffended by anybody who has a differing view. But they put protocols in place that are they're very serious about the way that they separate everybody out. They do a lot of outdoor learning. And then they have
nice.
Limited, they're phasing in the kids who can come back and doing it in a way that promotes safety. There's no perfect solution, you know, like the NFL. There's really no great answer, but we're taking a little bit of a calculated risk and trying to.
You're weighing the benefit of them being there versus, you know, how, you know, dangerous the threat is.
Right. Well, and yes, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so it is, you know, this is chapter whatever of that story, and somewhere early in the book. And so we don't know how it's going to play out, but we're taking all of our precautions. They wear masks. Do
you worry about that? Some people say, "Oh, I don't want my kid going back because it'll freak them out because they have to follow those procedures and wear these masks." Do you see that making an impact or weirding your kids out in any way?
Not mine. You know, so here's the thing. It's like people are more sophisticated than you give them credit for, even your kids. And it's like, so in that situation, it's like, I am really interested in the way that they understand things. And they don't always tell you right away, but it's like you can kind of pick it up over time. So yeah, I guess what I would say is I am not cavalier about it, but I don't spend all day, every day worrying about it either. Cause I do think that the school administrators and teachers are put in an impossible position. It's impossible. Like, there's no way, like, people are mad all the time. And it's like, I understand that too. So it's like, we're really the culpable party here is the fact that we live in a time somebody tweeted, I feel like I maybe told this last time too, but it's like somebody tweeted once earlier this year, I really miss precedented times. And I was like,
yeah. I was like, no, you didn't tell that, but that's great.
So it's like
everything's unprecedented.
I know. Yeah. And so then you do this thing. This is so stupid. Then you do this thing where it's like you try to find new and novel ways to say that. And like, yeah, the one that I got last week that I really made me laugh until I got like 3 emails that did sort of the same thing. It was like, I hope you're staying positive and testing negative. And then there was like a little fist bump emoji. And I was like, okay, that's pretty funny. Mm-hmm. And then on a Slack channel that I'm on, somebody popped on and they were like, hey, have you guys seen this? And I was like, well, now it's dead to me. Mm-hmm. Like, now I can never use that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's funny. We're still, we're all still people, and we all do the best we can. And them being at school means that I don't have to talk to them about 90s hip hop. So that's a step in the right direction.
So anything else going on?
I mean, those are the big things. We last time I know we talked about 20 by 2, my South by Southwest show.
Mm-hmm.
The satellite show that we do in Chicago still happens a few times a year. The challenge with that, and I have been in touch with Hugh Forrest, who's the director of Interactive at South by. This is really interesting. So he and I have known each other a while now, and that festival and conference has always been done right by me and my show. So I just reached out to him partly to just say, hey, by the way, I heard that you guys made an announcement that South by Southwest is happening in 2021.
They made that announcement?
They did.
Okay.
That it's going to be, they're working out the details with the city, and that it's probably going to be a hybrid thing, right? So some of it will be virtual, and there will be some other things in person.
Some social distance kind of in-person events where it's very procedural, and then you have some virtual stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just waved at him, and I was like, hey, listen, you guys don't ever make these announcements in a vacuum. So it's like, you've already got this figured out. But I was like, if you don't have some of the virtual stuff wrangled, let me know, because I'm doing this thing. And so I shot him a note about that. But I also said, the original plan with 20 by 2 at South by Southwest was to wrap up our South by run at 20 shows.
Yeah.
And so that was the one that we were going to do last March. And of course, obviously that didn't happen. And so I just basically said, our plan, contingent upon how it is that you guys decide to do all this, is that we still want to come back and do a 20th show. And so he was like, great. So we're going to keep in touch about it. I don't have a final analysis in terms of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And it might end up being one of these things that we end up needing to do virtually instead of in person. And that'll be new. The creative piece of this never goes away and continues to be fun. I'm just at this point, it would be nice if sometime over the next few months that there's some sort of something emerges that provides some clear direction in terms of where all of this is going to go. And who knows, maybe that'll end up being, it could end up being one way or the other.
Direction from South by Southwest.
Well, no, so I guess this is what I was going to say. The election could have some impact in terms of whatever the policy is moving forward. If that's the case, more direction one way or the other, at least some sort of clear indication of
people
what
can
needs
plan.
So people can plan, I think would be helpful.
It's
so
true.
We'll see. That's good. I feel like there are other things too. It's there are always 2 or 3 things in the hopper. Well, and I won't go into all of this on the podcast because I don't want to give it away, but I also am working on a TV pilot.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's not very far along in concept, and I will tell you more about it when we're not recording. But just because there's some of the intellectual property I need to protect first. But the gist is that it combines some of the performance stuff that I have been able to do before with some elements that I think could be really fun and familiar, but done in a way. This is going to be super mysterious and not helpful at all to anybody listening. So I'm sorry, but it's could be super interesting and also kind of combine elements from some past shows that I think could be reimagined. I saw Jeff Tweedy from Wilco was on CBS this morning. He's written, he recorded a new album during quarantine. That guy just keeps writing songs. And then he wrote a book called How to Write One Song. And so they're like, well, what if I want to write more than that? He's like, well, you need to buy another book. I was like, that's kind of perfect. But like sort of taking that, and essentially that's what it is. It's like this. I read some reviews of it. I haven't read the book. And whatever your opinion is of that guy or that act is like sort of immaterial. It's the idea of taking this little piece of creativity and how you go about honing it. And so apparently that I didn't plan on doing a review of his book that I haven't read either, but it's like basically the gist is that it is apparently a sort of part philosophy and part instruction in terms of like how you take, and basically some feedback, which is like, when you start this, you're probably going to be really bad at it. Mm-hmm. But
that sounds like an interesting book. That'd be good for just like self-development or whatever.
Could be.
Because it's a mix between philosophy and also I feel like a good way to get people to write one song. Also, music in general is really intimidating. It's like, well, yeah, like you don't start a whole album. You just try to write one song.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's, so I have friends that are writers too. And it's like that, if you sit down, so I had this idea where, we talked about that I did stand up in college.
I think we barely touched on it.
Yeah. So enough that it was like, that it's like, I have experienced the highs of doing really well and the lows of not doing really well. Mm-hmm. And so, if you want, that's one of those deals where it's like, it's truly a gladiator situation. Like you either lean into it and just take the bruises. There was a Chappelle set not very long ago where he'd won some award. He kind of split time growing up between DC and Ohio after his parents split. And so he when he started doing stand up, part of the time he was doing stand up in Washington DC. And so they gave him some award at a comedy club in DC. And so he was saying that that he was driving down the road and he's listening to an interview with Patton Oswalt, and Patton Oswalt is the son of, his dad was in the military. And so he grew up around Maryland. And so they started out like a week apart doing the comedy clubs in that particular part of the world. And so the gist is that nobody's first set is great. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, I'm driving down the road and I hear Patton Oswalt tell this story. And he's like, well, Dave Chappelle's first set was great. And he said, but Chappelle's, when he's retelling that story, he's like, that just made me really happy. But he's like, when I basically, like, what he didn't say was that like that set went really great. And then maybe like the next 9 or 10 sets that I had went awful, like just awful. And then he made an analogy, which I will not repeat here, but suffice it to say, well, basically it was like, he was like, the way that he put it was like, okay, so he's like, say you have sex for the first time, and he's like, that's really great, and he's like, everything goes great, and then he's like, and then for the next 9 or 10 times, it's like exactly the same, except somebody is hitting you in the head with a sledgehammer. He's like, that's what it's like. That's the difference. Mm-hmm. So he's like, if you can sort of get through how bad it is to do badly in that situation, then that's the difference between comedians that can do whatever they want now and then some who can't. So I am, I have not done a set in a couple of years, but it is something that I still pay attention to. And I just really, always will have an appreciation for how comedians work a room and how those who get really good at it, like what their rhythm is. Do you know something I learned today? Do you know that Saturday Night Live only exists because once upon a time NBC used to run Carson Tonight Show episodes on the weekends?
No, did not know that.
Yeah, that's true. And so he was like, I think that people deserve a couple of days off. So they called up Lorne Michaels, who was young at the time, and said, can you create something here? And so he did. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there is kind of maybe a little bit of connective experience that we're all sort of trying, we're all just trying to figure this out. But it's like seeing like the process behind it, like that Madden thing with Lombardi, like just if you are as fascinated by the journey as the destination, like that's really ticket. I feel like on a lot of things, just to be really excited about the way that you get there can be and sometimes is frankly more interesting than what the finish line looks like anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've heard that, and that should be people's focus, because once you get there, then you're done, and then there's going to be something else that you need to do, or that you're going to want to do.
Right. Well, and it's like we've all met people who are, maybe in that situation where it's like you get done with, and kids are like this too. Like it's like where you finish something and then you immediately want something else. Like you have to set another goal.
Mm-hmm.
Goal setting is great, but it's like if you don't sort of enjoy whatever that thing is while you're getting there, it's like, anyway, I'm kind of beating that horse to death, but I do feel like it's like that's something I try to remind myself of.
For sure, it is something to think about. Otherwise, I mean, yeah, you're just gonna have another hill to climb.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything you want to say to wrap up as far as
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things. One, so we'll just talk about all my shenanigans that we covered today. So if you're in Texas, you can always find Steamm at Steamm with 2 M's, STEAMM.com, or anywhere else. We'll ship it all over the place. If you're in Texas, you can also find us at Central Market for a little while. And would certainly encourage you to stop in there. And even if you don't buy our stuff, that store's great, and I'm fond of those guys. So, we appreciate them. And then, if you're planning some sort of virtual something, go take a look at airmeet.com if you're a little zoomed out. So, anyway, but ultimately, I hope everybody stays safe. I always appreciate coming on here, and I appreciate you having me in. This is fun.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, Kevin.
Yeah. Pleasure.